Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the fourth workshop of the Arkansas COVID-19 Recovery and Resiliency webinar series. My name is Margaret Jackson, and I'm the director of the University Center program here at the Delta Center for Economic Development at Arkansas State University. Thanks for joining our workshop today. The COVID-19 Recovery and Resiliency webinar series is part of a larger COVID-19 Recovery and Resiliency initiative that documents the historical impact of the pandemic on the state of Arkansas and provides training and regional planning for recovery and resiliency efforts. It's a joint effort between the Delta Center for Economic Development, the Arkansas Economic Development Institute, and the Arkansas Association of Development Organizations. The project itself is funded by the U.S. Department of Commerce Economic Development Administration. And you can find out more about this initiative by visiting our project website. Thanks, Matt. Matt put a link to the project website in our chat box, so you can access it through there. The focus of our workshop today is crisis communications. And as we know, the pandemic, it brought about many challenges to us in terms of communicating. We often receive a lot of news from different sources and mixed messages that made things confusing, to say the least. Our presenters will touch on that today and give us some ideas on how to be better prepared for the next crises that we face. And I'm sure that we will learn a lot. I also want to tell you about two additional workshops that we are having next week that I think you would be interested in participating in. One is on October 12th. It's called Tools for the Trade. And the focus of this workshop is to provide you hands-on training in a variety of different subjects. We will provide someone from the Arkansas State Data Center that will lead us through the new census.gov website and give us some instructions on how to navigate the 2020 census data that's been released. We'll also have someone that will be available to talk to us about labor analysis and marketing type tools that you can work with in your community and business. We will also have someone to talk about grant writing and administration and how that has changed in 2021. And the other workshop is on Thursday, the 14th. That is building a post-pandemic work model. This will be an exciting event. This will be good for business and communities to participate. We have Keith Gamble from Arkansas Marketing Solutions, and he's going to give us some transformational leadership training. We will have Mark Goodman talk to us about some of the innovative post-pandemic work models. We'll also have a panel that's going to be led by Shane Broadway of the ASU Systems Office, and he is going to interview some representatives from the Arkansas Office of Workforce Skills Development and the Arkansas Community Colleges about ways that they have and ideas that they have in place to reskill our workforce after COVID-19. So these are the two workshops that we have next week, and we have two more going through November. Matt, would you mind placing a link to the registration landing page in the chat box? Oh, he's already done that. Thanks, Matt. One other thing I want to note is that the registration links for all the four workshops are open right now. You can register for any of them if you're interested, so please go ahead and do so. Another thing that I want to cover quickly, later this week, we're going to be releasing a podcast with Jarena Storm. She was instrumental in the Arkansas Joint Information Center's COVID-19 communication efforts. And the Joint Information Center, or the JIC, as it is called, consisted of a group of key communication officials within the Arkansas Department of Health, the Arkansas Division of Emergency Management, and some other agencies. Matt Shreve, our Delta Center's marketing coordinator and technical guru, conducted this interview with Jarena Storm this week. So because this also has a crisis communications theme and may be of interest to you, I want to break here and let Matt tell you a little bit more about it and how you can access that podcast.
Hey guys, hopefully everybody can hear me okay. We had a really great time yesterday. Our podcast is called Delta Pod. It is associated with the Delta Center for Economic Development. We did get to interview Jarena Storm yesterday. As Mary Margaret said, she's with the Arkansas Joint Information Center. Jarena works with the mayor of Fort Smith and was picked specifically for her participation and performance in the 500-year flood crisis that struck the area in 2019. The mayor really saw her leadership skills and wanted her to participate in creating and managing this information center. The Arkansas Joint Information Center's purpose is to facilitate the singular dissemination of information during an emergency or crisis event. It is their job to make sure that all the information to be gained from news outlets and sources are all the same and without deviation. If you'd like to listen to this podcast, Delta Pod will be posting this episode about probably mid next week or at the end, I would say, on all of our social media platforms. We have a Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. It'll be posted there. Just look for the red and black A-State logo, and you should find us simply by typing in the Delta Center for Economic Development. Delta Pod posts 2 podcasts a month. Our second one this month will be on an interview that we did with the Dean of Osteopathic Medicine here at the A-State, Dr. Shane Spites, where he will catch us up on his experiences on being the voice of reason in the local media for COVID-19 information. And again, just visit look for the post on our social media platforms if you follow us on any of those, and you'll see it when it gets posted next week.
Thanks, Matt. I also want to tell you before I forget that we're going to be emailing you a short survey after this workshop's over. It's only 5 questions long. It will just take a couple of minutes for you to fill out, but it will help us a lot. We're midway through the webinar series right now, and we still have an opportunity to make modifications that will ensure that you're getting the most out of these free trainings, and that's ultimately what we want. It's also going to help us with grant writing reporting purposes, which is helpful to us. But I also wanted to tell you that there's one question on the survey that's going to help you. We want to know if your organization needs any training. Here at the Delta Center, we conduct a lot of training with communities and businesses, whether that be economic development or community development training or professional development training, innovation, entrepreneurship training. We do a lot of things here. If you have a need, we want to know about it. And if we can't do it, or if our other partners like AEDI or ADO can't assist, we want to guide you to the right people that you need to get you the help that you need. And also, I want to tell you, if your need fits within the scope of work for this grant-funded project, we might be able to get you what you need for a free or reduced rate, which is always a plus. So next, let's watch Governor Asa Hutchinson welcome everybody to today's workshop.
Good morning. I'm Governor Asa Hutchinson. Welcome to the Arkansas Recovery and Resiliency Workshop, which will add to your knowledge of new tools and resources as you prepare to lead in times of difficulty, such as what we've experienced during the pandemic. COVID-19 has touched every aspect of our lives. We have lost loved ones and friends. We've changed the way we educate our children and how we gather for worship and other community activities. Many have lost income or lost a job. In the midst of this, Arkansans have eagerly and unselfishly stood up to help their neighbors. And this is the spirit that will see us through other tough seasons. The Arkansas State University Delta Center for Economic Development, the Arkansas Economic Development Institute at UALR, and the state's planning and development districts are hosting these workshops around the state with the support of the U.S. Department of Commerce Economic Development Administration. These workshops teach community leaders and business leaders to implement new strategies for resiliency and recovery. Thank you for taking the time to attend and for your service to Arkansas.
To get started, and I'd like to introduce our guest from Stonewall Consulting. Dana Dussing Berry is an experienced communications professional and leader known for developing PR strategies around key messages resulting in exceptional PR, media relations, and story development outcomes for clients nationally, regionally, and locally. Her work has driven awareness, increased growth, and enhanced the success of clients across the country. You may have seen work for her clients in or on the Wall Street Journal, NBC Nightly News, CBS Evening News, CBS This Morning, Fox Business News, CNN, Bloomberg, CNN Money, CNBC.com, Fox and Friends, Entrepreneur, Huffington Post, and many more trade, local, and regional media outlets. And we also have Lucy Pathman working with us today. She's the Director of Brand Management and Communications for Stoneward Advertising. She began her career over 26 years ago with Alltel, which was the nation's fifth largest wireless company until it sold to Verizon Wireless in 2010. And this experience allowed her to amass national credentials in marketing communications across a wide range of disciplines, from promotions to publicity. Lucy's collaborative leadership of the agency's brand management and public relations team allows Stoneward to deliver a one-voice approach to its clients' brands. And we thank you both for being with us today, and we look forward to hearing from you. So whenever you're ready.
Well, thank you so much, Mary Margaret, and hello to everyone who's joining us. I don't believe Lucy has been able to join in. My greatest apologies. She had a family emergency, and I believe is at the hospital right now with family members. But I'm glad that everyone joined us today, because the communication process around the COVID-19 crisis is one that continues even 18, 19 months into the pandemic. It's one we've worked very closely with our clients on, and one that I know that you continue to navigate on a daily basis. Just for example, one of the large home testing companies yesterday had a bunch of its home tests recalled. It was a voluntary recall. And you may have seen in the news that Los Angeles has just this morning, it was talking about on the network news that it has approved a vaccine mandate that requires people 12 or over to prove they're fully vaccinated before they come into any business in LA. On the other hand, Florida is trying to ban districts from requiring masks, school districts from requiring masks. So it's something that's ongoing every day. And what we wanted to talk to you a little bit about is how to manage through those ups and downs and the pendulum swings of the news that's going on. Whether it's national news or more appropriately for us in your local community. I do work with national media a lot now, but I got my starts at a CBS affiliate in Little Rock. Yes, I'll share my screen in just one second, in Sherman, Texas. And then I came to work for KARK, and that's how I ended up in Little Rock. So I was there as a reporter, producer, and an anchor in both of those stations, and have since translated that early start in my career to media relations. So I'm going to share my screen with you and hope that I can, hold on one second. I've got too many screens showing up for me. One second. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, ma'am, we can.
Okay.
If you'll move it, if you'll go ahead and into presentation view.
And my
You can hit-
apologies.
No,
I'm
you're
going
fine.
to have my glasses.
You can hit that slideshow at the top. On that top bar there.
Show me again where it is.
It's right in the middle, right after animations.
I apologize. I really thought y'all were going to share it from there. So you can tell
No,
that
you're totally. Would you like me to share it for you?
that would be great. That would be great, because
Give me just a minute then.
I'm obviously on the struggle bus here. I
No,
may
you're
work
totally-
with national media, but sharing PowerPoints via Zoom is not my.
Give me just a moment to pull that up. Thank you for bearing with me.
Meanwhile, I saw a question earlier about hiring and navigating through that process. I can definitely speak to the fact that that is the case with several of the clients with which we work. We have to translate around that message very, very carefully. And I would be happy to talk with you more about that, because you cannot Your statements have to be very modified in the fact that it's become such a politicized issue that you need to be careful of how you put that messaging forward. So yes, it's all right to say that you're looking to hire people, and it's all right to give stats about how many people you have applying or not applying.
Miss Dana, I have your presentation up on the screen, so if you'd like,
Okay.
you can stop sharing your screen.
Excellent. Okay, let me stop sharing. Thank you so much.
Can everyone see her presentation? Mary Margaret? Oh, well, give me just
I cannot see it. I'm sorry.
No,
Okay.
you're totally fine. Give me 1 second, guys. How about now?
Matthew,
Yep.
I'm back. I can do it now. I've got it again.
Yep.
I've got it on.
Yep, we're good.
Okay. There we go. We should be running, up and running. All right. So I'll jump into it. If you are familiar with PR at all, or maybe you're not familiar with PR, I'll go ahead and give you the definition of how the Public Relations Society of America describes it. It's a strategic communication process that builds mutually beneficial relationships between organizations and their publics. And the thing I love about the next quote on this slide is that PR will give you credibility if you do a good job of it, if you become a trustworthy source for media or even influencers in your market. Public relations is the story of your brand. And no matter if you're with a healthcare system, a city, a government, if you're with a small business or a large manufacturer, it's the story that goes behind what you do every day in your organization. And by telling it, you increase the odds of good publicity, and you can minimize or somewhat mitigate negative news if it comes your way or impacts your business or community. Once you have a good public relations effort established, you get those key relationships going with personnel in the media or influencers in your market, even if they're bloggers or people who are just active on social media. One thing it does too is put you in a position as a source or a resource because it creates a top of mind awareness for your brand or your community or your city or even your office within one of those entities. It helps you generate non-paid announcements. I think a really good example of that is a restaurant trade with which we work. I mean, a restaurant chain with which we work. And they have a sweepstakes going on right now. Well, sweepstakes are not considered news by tried and true reporters. But because we have a good relationship with one of the trade outlets, they were kind enough to see the news elements in that and use the story for its online presence. So I think it can work in your favor when you need to have something that gets information out without having to pay for it necessarily. We call it earned media. It offers the opportunity for the creation of your own news content, whether you're writing for a blog or a news release or a post or something you're going to put up on your website. You have complete editorial control over the things that you disseminate once you write them and put them out there. And by serving as a source, whether it's online or in person, by phone, it builds trust and respect within those communities you serve. And along the way, you can develop somewhat of an anticipation of what reporters are going to need or what they're looking for. Some of the tools of the trade that we use, and we highly recommend that these become electronic if at all possible on your web platform, and that's to have a media kit. Within that media kit, you can tell the story of your brand or your community or your company or your office. You can put together some fact sheets that have relevant data or information that would be useful to a reporter or their community. Even throw in some leadership profiles and images that go with those leaders. So you can put a face with a name. One thing that we also recommend is if you've had positive news coverage, go ahead and link that within a media kit on your site, if that's an option for you. Do some screen grabs. So if you've had a nice placement in the Arkansas Democrat Gazette or a local newspaper, that is showcased. Reporters love that. They want their information to be shared. Make it easy for reporters. Go ahead and load some images. If you are, if there's a positive way to frame how COVID vaccines are being given in your city and you have permission, go ahead and post some images of that. If you have a food bank that's serving local residents in need during the COVID crisis, post some pictures of that and make them easily downloaded or easy to download by any media outlets or bloggers or influencers. Also, if you have a larger market you're trying to represent, you may know of the reporters in your hometown or who cover you, but if there's a chance that you want to reach a little further out, go ahead and target those locations and figure out who's on the radio there, who's on TV there, who writes for the local newspaper or news service in that community. And if you want to get to a larger market, those are usually found via Google. You can go to any of the television stations and find out their independent email addresses for the different reporters or even the newsrooms or general news desk. And then if you have any news releases you want to share historically or new, go ahead and load those on an online media kit. Ways you've responded to the crisis, ways you anticipate responding to the crisis. Those are all relevant and useful for anyone who is going to write a story on you. What reporters are looking for, media outlets are looking for, new and different information. If there's just a nugget of something new, they don't want to regurgitate or reprocess beyond a week or two. And speak directly to the issue. What you're able to do when it's your one opportunity to get your message out. So speak directly to the issue, and we'll get a little bit more into that later on in the presentation. If you have any data, how many people you've served, how many people in the community have been impacted, just like we got through with that survey, use that data to your advantage. If it's negative data, don't hesitate to share it if you can couch it within the larger framework of a positive message. Identify your sources. If you have physicians or experts or thought leaders in your area, identify those and make them available for quotes or to be interviewed. Make sure the information you give out is timely. Don't rehash things from, early in the pandemic because it's changed so much. Try to get new, fresh numbers and timely information. Also, the old adage, if you are old enough to remember who Barbara Walters was, she always tried to make people cry in her interviews. So did Oprah. So not that we want anybody to cry, but if you can add an emotional or personal aspect to what you're speaking, politicians do it all the time, and real stories of interest at the local, all the way up to the network level, have an emotional or personal story behind them for the most part. If there's a mass appeal, you try not to have something that's so segmented it's only interesting to a few people. Try to think of the big picture when you're being quoted. And certainly everything that's relevant to your local area, it's ownable or it's something that's very close to home. But please avoid trying to get out there with information that doesn't have a real news angle to it. If you have anything inaccurate or it's not very timely, likely not to be covered. Try not to make it too commercial. I mentioned the sweepstakes story. That is a little commercial, being an old reporter, but there were some news nuggets within that. And so try not to be too commercial in what you have to say. And if you have to use jargon, if you're in a very specific sort of an entity where you have to use government speak or accounting speak or sometimes even agri speak that is beyond what maybe a new reporter or not non-seasoned reporter. Go ahead and explain what the jargon means. That's always very, very helpful. I was a newbie reporter when I moved to Arkansas, and I didn't know how to say El Dorado. And so I got on the air and said El Dorado, and that was not a fun time for me. The phones lit up for that. But if you want to understand reporters, they can really be your ally, but they typically have a preconceived angle. They've either had it assigned to them by their editor, or it's a story they're chasing on their own. That was very much the case when I was a reporter. Even though we tried to share both sides of the story, there was typically an angle we were pursuing. And the reporter gets to control the editing, what is ultimately seen on the air or in print. It's a rare exception that you have the opportunity to edit what goes out before it's published. Be sure to know the audiences of the media outlets. It may be your local community, it may be something broader, but know who their audiences are, because the media is your pipeline to them oftentimes. And take the time to develop a professional relationship with reporters when you have the time. I know when I very first started with the agency more than 14 years ago, I had stayed home with my children for some time while I was rearing them. And I had to do a media tour in New York. So I just picked up the phone and called some people and asked if they would have coffee with me. And they did, surprisingly. And over the years, we've actually become friends in a lot of those cases. So try to develop a professional relationship with them in advance. I know we're now into the COVID crisis and we're beyond that at this point. But a lot of times you can make a friendship by calling a reporter and just letting them know that if they need a resource, you're there, or someone within your entity is there to serve as a source or a resource for them. But remember, even though you want to be the leading authority on it, oftentimes they have to show both sides of the story. So just keep that in mind. Don't get your feelings hurt if you're not the only one they include. When you engage with the media, remember your purpose. I always advise clients to say, you're the one telling the story, so you control the message. But prepare in advance, know what you want the story to be, and stick to that when you're being interviewed. I mentioned avoiding technical jargon. If you have to use it, just explain it. And I'm a big fan. I've said I a couple of times because I'm the presenter right now, but I'm a big fan of trying to use the terminology we and our. So it speaks to a larger work behind an initiative or whatever you're doing for your community. Remember, there's no such thing as off the record. We've seen that joked about, but it's fact. Even this morning on network news, they had someone's hot mic that they used as a part of a story. Someone was commenting about mask wearing, and that was captured and retold this morning. So just remember, no mic is silent, and you're never off the record. Again, connect on a personal level. If you don't have time to meet them in advance, try to get to know them a little bit before you talk to them. You know, ask them where they're from, how long they've lived in the state. I'm sure they're tired of covering COVID. Ask them, if they've seen any really fascinating or interesting stories along the way. But if you have a chance prior to being interviewed or engaging with them, try to read or watch or even check out their social media feed. Most reporters are active on Twitter, and I would highly recommend seeing what's on their mind, what they're interested in, and mention those to them if you have a chance. Everybody likes to think that you're watching or paying attention to their work, and reporters are no different when it comes to that. But effective public relations can really benefit you in a crisis. Statistics tell us almost 60% of business leaders have experienced a crisis, and now we basically all have, but only half have a crisis plan in place. So your reputation, your revenues, all of those are at stake, with 70% of crisis impacted entities reporting corporate standing and financial performance. That they took more than a year to recover. We saw in that the poll earlier, some haven't felt it so much, but it will be interesting when all that data is collected. My guess is that we'll see that most people have felt the financial impact of this particular crisis. So I do recommend putting together some sort of crisis plan in advance. Now we're in the middle of this one, but what I would recommend, and what the large businesses we're working with right now are doing, is thinking forward. What's next? What's coming next? And so, there could be some new developments, hopefully not, as far as closures or waves that come through. So try to sit down when you're doing your 2022 planning and think about those what ifs in advance. Things that we never saw coming our way are here with us now. So try to think through those what ifs. Any communications plan that you put together is try to prevent a crisis in advance if possible. But as we know, we none of us could have prevented this one individually, certainly. And try to think of ways that you can minimize the risk or harm to your organization or its employees by containing the situation and timing it when you're going to be in the spotlight, or you think you might be in the spotlight. Think about that in advance. For us, I can say, and I let Mary Margaret know that some of our information is proprietary with our larger clients, but I can tell you that one of them had a local facility in a state that it was deemed an essential business, and it needed to stay open through the pandemic. So those workers were coming to work, and one of the television affiliates pulled up outside a large facility that they operate and really maligned that facility for staying open and not putting its workers first. So that was something a time when the spotlight was really shown on that individual business. Fortunately, we had prepared somewhat for that, not for the pandemic, certainly, but for how we would respond should those live trucks roll up outside one of the businesses. And that helped mitigate that to some extent. We provided statements to the television station. We did not allow them to get the reporters to get close enough to the individuals walking in and out of the building. It was a gated facility. And so nobody had to be interviewed or put on the spot about that. It really ended up limiting some of the social push that could have been out there, as well as we communicated early and often with the staff at that facility. So they knew that we were being very proactive as far as protecting their health and well-being. But there would likely be some media attention and coverage. And interestingly, out of that now, months later, most of those employees wanted to go to work. They wanted to be at work, and they were appreciative of the opportunity to continue working. They were also appreciative of the strategic efforts that were being made to protect their health and safety. And that would, of course, you would want that to be a part of any plan that you put together. We did take a look at the overall impact of the company or organization, whether it was, financial, because that facility did have to close down for deep cleaning after cases were found there, as most businesses have experienced. If there was going to be any litigation out of it, fortunately, there was not. The products continued to flow out of that particular facility, and it did well through that. But there was a lot of planning and thought that went into that prior to the TV stations rolling up out front. So all in all, it did protect their reputation. And that's the goal of any plan, is to manage your reputation through a crisis. And we were back to normal pretty quickly through that particular incident. When you start on a plan, if you don't already have one, when you start on one, you may already have one, but be sure and define all of your stakeholders. In that particular scenario, it was our primary focus and concern were the people in the plant who needed to be considered, not only their health and well-being, but that of their families. So we communicated, as I said, early and often with those individuals. Additional stakeholders were, as a supplier, the vendors with whom we work, as well as those who receive the products out of that particular plant. So there was, when you're in that planning, think of who all your stakeholders are going to be. And then within your top line people, make sure that you have a cache of phone numbers and ways to reach people within that stakeholder community. Keep those at the ready and available. Be sure to assess your vulnerabilities, what could happen when and where, and how it might impact your customers or your business overall or your team members internally. And then create a plan of how you'll communicate if your channels are down. I think one of the best examples, I think I mentioned I'm certified in crisis communications, and one of the best examples in the training that I received was a newsroom that had to continue to report the news even after there was an active shooter in their own building. This has been several years ago. They had to move off-site. They didn't have access to they had to escape the building. So there was limited access to their technology, yet they were the ones in this particular town that was, they were pretty much charged with sharing the news and keeping the public up to date. So you have to plan for all sorts of scenarios when you sit down and you do a strategic crisis communications plan. Think of in advance too, who's going to represent your organization as the spokesperson. And then if you have the funds, get them professionally media trained or practice internally. So your spokesperson or your spokespeople will not have that deer in the headlights sort of look that we've all seen from individuals who've been caught in crisis situations. I would highly recommend that. Developing talking points, training them, whether it's just a one-on-one between you and the person within your organization, or like I said, with a professional team to help with that. So when it comes, and please feel free, I'm not seeing the questions pop up, but if any pop up, just interrupt me and let me know. And I hope I'm not moving too quickly through the material, but ever important is timeliness, which I've already mentioned that 2 or 3 times, so I'll mention it again. But to be empathetic and be clear in the way you communicate, state the facts, speak proactively about what's being done. All of that is critical to leading through a crisis situation. You've seen crises handled well, and you've seen them handled poorly. Yesterday was a good example of how to well communicate. I don't know if any of you saw or listened to the shooting at the high school in Arlington, Texas. But they had a team of the top law enforcement officials locally, as well as those at the national level, very confidently communicating how the situation was handled. It was a lesson in how to communicate well. And I felt like if I had had a child in that school district, I would have said with my child. That's the crux of what as you can be and communicate that verbally and in other ways that we'll talk about more in just a minute. But you, I hope I'm not freezing up. It says my connection is unstable, but take control of the situation by commanding the narrative. Make sure that you are the one who is speaking the message in the tone and with the information you have available, and the demeanor of caring and concern and empathy what's going on in the public. All of us have been impacted one way or another by the COVID crisis, whether it's someone we've known or loved or are still seeing in hospitals and so forth. We can be empathetic about this particular crisis because it's impacted all of us. But there are legions of companies and entities who've handled it poorly. The ones who come out, the entities, whether it's state and local government or hospitals or businesses, you can see the ones that have come out well because they planned and implemented well. When you're doing your planning, create a guide, a framework that you can follow. Of course, as I mentioned, the safety of anyone within your organization and within your community should be first and foremost in the mind. Notifying those stakeholders and making sure you have all the various platforms in place with which to communicate if you're having trouble with the communications tools you're used to, if you have to move off site, if you have to set up landlines, whatever it is, try to plan for that in advance. Be prepared for the media to just show up unannounced. It happens, and you've probably had it happen to you. Prepare some holding statements, and I'm going to give you samples of those in just a minute. So you can practice them, you can edit them, you can make sure that they are communicating as much as you can without overstepping. And try to refrain from using any inflammatory comments if you can. I know one of my favorite is, not of my, I shouldn't say my favorite, but one to avoid, I think, unless you're police or law enforcement, is the term "we're investigating this." That's an alarming word. If you want to say we're looking into the matter, to say it eloquently, that are truthful, but without being inflammatory. And then again, offering some interview tips or training to whomever is your spokesperson or spokesperson. The outcome is to equip management and team members within the organization with the necessary information they need to effectively manage a crisis. But it's better if you can prepare all that in advance, maybe even simulate it and practice it in advance. Here's one of the holding statements that's been modified we used for one of our clients. And this one was, in fact, for the situation I told you about, one of their large facilities, that they're preparing ongoing safety for the care and concern of their employees, and we're following rigorous CDC guidelines. Told why we were keeping those facilities open. Certain governmental entities had deemed it was necessary for this business to stay open, and we listed those governmental agencies, and we were in fact on those lists so they could reference them on those government websites. We let them know that employees were welcome to stay home. This was early in the pandemic if they weren't comfortable with coming in. We talked about the benefits that either would or would not apply, and how we would continue to comply with standards at the time. Those have changed somewhat and evolved since then, but this was in a bullet dotted format. It was easier for this client to provide this information to the media outlets that showed up in this bullet dotted format. You can also go with a paragraph form. This is some work that's, again, been modified so as not to identify the client, but we started off with the empathetic statement of how we have our health and safety of our employees first and foremost. This particular business had to close, so they were closed by the local community. So we had to explain why that happened, because one of these businesses did have a COVID case. So we detailed as much as we could without stepping too deep into that employee's personal information. We worked with local health authorities on how that person was doing. We also complied by the national guidelines. And then this particular client took a step further and they developed their own cleaning certification process that they trained all team members across the country before they could even go back to work if their locations, and I should say when all of their locations were closed. And then we actually put it up on the website. If you want to see what we're doing to provide a clean, safe, healthy environment, not only for our customers who come into the store, but first and foremost, our own people. So this one was in a paragraph form. This was provided to several media outlets in the area, and it was used verbatim as best I can remember. So when you work to prepare your own statement or statements, one thing to consider, you'll notice that both of those were relatively brief. The longer your statement is, the less likely it's going to be used. If you ramble or get too far afield, then they'll likely use, and we've all seen those snippets of sound bites on the news. So keep it brief and to the point. Share your concern and compassion. Be prepared to use the data we talked about early on. Know your facts, how it's going to affect your entity or your business or the community as a whole. And if you need to get this approved by legal counsel, do it in advance. They don't always work on the fly, but if this is something that needs legal approval, I highly recommend pursuing that. And then put your statement up on your website. If you do choose to go the social route, be prepared for comments, good and bad, that are going to come your way, and you will have to respond to them. As a whole, I would say we don't recommend taking down negative comments unless they are inflammatory. So I would warn against that. So if you're going to go the social route, just be prepared to respond to that. But by doing so, by being trustworthy, accurate, providing up-to-date information, putting it on your website for all to see, provides such transparency and trust between your audience. It will really pay off now and in the future. So all that said, one of the essentials for engaging with the media is you just can't always control everything. Don't even try. Provide the facts, don't embellish, train your spokespeople or allow them the opportunity to train themselves and practice. Concentrate on your key audiences, whomever needs to hear your message, know who they are. And if you need help, ask for it. I know as a reporter, when somebody didn't know the answer, I would rather them tell me, I don't have that answer, but let me get back to you, this afternoon or tomorrow morning or as early as possible. So if you need help, ask for it. But prepare. I think you've heard me say this throughout the presentation. Prepare your responses, prepare your anticipated questions. Remember, there's no such thing as off the record. And if you don't know the answer, just say so. Be human, strive for an air of informality. We've all seen people who are very stiff and rigid who are being interviewed. So keep it simple and just relate to people one-on-one. State the most important facts first. In journalism school, which A-State has a fine one, by the way. I've had many fine graduates come through our internship program. And the founder of our agency is an A-State graduate, by the way. But state the most important facts first. It's called the inverted pyramid form of writing, where when you read a book, you're building up to the very end. But in news writing and in reporting, the very most important facts should come first. It's okay to repeat your answer, circle back to things that are important that you need to communicate in your messaging, continue to circle back to them. That's fine to do that more than once. I have done so in this presentation just because some things are more important than others. Again, don't expect to review the story prior to publication. That's highly unlikely. and offer to be available for follow-up. I'm offering to you right now, if you have any questions, you're welcome to contact me. And I'd be happy to give you my email address. It's on the Stone Ward website. But that's one thing reporters love. If they maybe were writing so quickly they couldn't read their hen scratch when they got back to the newsroom, it was always nice to know I had an opportunity to follow up and call back the source with whom I was speaking, so I could clarify and make sure I'd gotten my facts straight before it went on the air. So that's in a nutshell, crisis communications. I could probably talk to you about it all day long, but I'm going to stop sharing my screen in case there are some questions, and I'm happy to address anything individually that you may be interested in.
Thank you so much, Dana. That was a very informative presentation. I know I learned a lot. And that's exactly what we want to do in this webinar series, is to provide some hands-on training for our audience, something that they can do to be ready for the next disaster that they might face, whatever that is. And I know I have a question, and since I'm the moderator, I'm going to ask the first one. I am interested, we're in a 24-hour news cycle, and we have been for a while, and we've got messages bombarding us all the time from different sources. And we know in the pandemic that we got maybe some of those sources were giving information that was inaccurate or incomplete. And I'm curious to see what you would think if you were a mayor or a local official, and you were on the ground and you had some important information to get out to your community. How would you do that? And how could you get that message understood and heard without it being lost in all of these other messages that are out there? What are some techniques or practices that you would put into play to make sure that you got your message out there?
And that's a great question. Thanks for asking it. My editing professor, who in college many years ago, he was one of the finest journalists I've known of my lifetime. And his answer was always to have terse and lively quotes. So when you have a message that you need to get out there, let's just say your community has had the largest case number drop in the state, and you want to communicate that because you believe it's good for people to know that we are taking all of our precautions, we're taking care of our community, and you want to tell the local media that. If you don't have local media, if you're in one of the really small markets, then find a way to put it up on your website and share it via social. Again, be prepared to respond, but come up with a data point like a headline. I always tell people to go look at BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed has these crazy, wild headlines that you can take a look at it, and they make you want to read it. So come out with information and put it in a way that would make you want to read it. What do you stop on when you're scrolling through your phone? What do you take the time to actually delve into? Think about that before you commit it to writing, and share it on your website. Or if you have a story like that, I think that would be a story of great pride. Call up the local radio station and ask if they would like a data point to share between songs for the DJ to read. Call one of the news stations in the larger markets, whether it's Jonesboro, Fort Smith, or South Arkansas stations, or Little Rock. Fort Smith, call around and give them this data point and say, I'd love to talk to you more about it. To me, something that stops me on my phone or when I'm scrolling through on the internet is the way I want to write things. And there are free of charge subject line graders on the internet. There's headline graders that you can enter your subject line or your headline, and it will tell you, it'll give you a score, whether it's good enough or not, to get someone's attention.
I had no idea.
Yeah, they're free, and I highly recommend different ones. Come and go. So just Google that free subject line grader, and you'll see some of them out there. And I highly recommend using something like that.
Well, that's great information. I'm going to definitely take advantage of that. Maybe later today when we work on our newsletter. Well, I've got another question from the chat. Is it possible to share too much information when you're in the middle of a crisis? And how do you decide what to share or when to share it, especially when events are fluid or uncertain?
Another great question. Thank you for whomever posed that. Less is more when you're in the middle of a crisis. We've seen plenty of people who've had to backtrack. Don't wear masks, do wear masks, double mask, triple mask, wear a face shield. We've seen those messages change over and over and over through this crisis. And so my recommendation is to get the facts that we know are solid. Use trusted resources, determine those in advance, whether it's the state health department, which I would highly recommend using the state health department because they are monitoring their messaging very carefully and closely. And it's a respected resource. You can use the CDC. I did that in the samples that I showed here, but they too have vacillated back and forth as the science has changed somewhat. So I think you've got to determine in your heart of hearts for your organization, what is going to be your trusted resource of information. Then when you have a timely story, that's the time to pick up the phone and release that information. If it's your local hospital, the ICU is booked. There's no more room in the inn. Go ahead and say that. I know it sounds like a negative story, but it's a fact. People have to divert and go other places. You don't want them to be surprised if they find out about it when they get to the hospital. Go ahead and put that information out there and then let them know what you're doing as a community leader to deal with the situation, what your tentative solution is going to be, and when you think you'll have a full-on solution. So for example, ICU is full in Benton, say. And so Benton is diverting cases to Hot Springs and to Little Rock. So your comment would be, our ICU is full, but we have a full plan of action in place. We're working with the ambulance resources, fire and ambulance resources to transport to Hot Springs and to Little Rock. We see that this is going to be, we believe this is going to be a 2-week issue. It may go beyond that. We're looking for a more full-blown solution. And once we have that solidified, we'll get back with you. And to me, that's kind of the perfect response. You've given them something to go back and use in a news story. You've given them confidence and trust that you have the situation in control and that you're thinking through the future of what that solution will be for that community.
Thanks. That's a good example. And thanks for the detailed analysis of that. That's very helpful to me too. Here's one. When planning for communication ahead of a disaster, are there any best practices or any examples of good media kits?
Yes, and I would, as far as crisis communications, people keep those fairly close to the vest, but there are a few university studies I've seen. There are some through PRSA, if you're fortunate enough to work with a local agency. Most of us had members of Public Relations Society of America on staff that we can access the resources of that national entity. There are plenty of case studies. I believe the Tylenol case study from many, many years ago is probably groundbreaking as far as crisis communication when tainted Tylenol was on the shelves. So a lot of those case studies are available online, and you can follow that sort of a diagram as to how you want to get started. You can think through that who, what, when, where, whys, and hows of any situation, and that's what journalists are going to cover. So if you follow that sort of pattern, you can talk about who's going to be impacted, what might happen to our business or our community. I mentioned a few of those things in the slide deck. When do we likely see this happening? If there's a third wave, do we see this happening to us again? How do we think a third wave might press on our budget, on our staff, on our resources? And then walk through all of those in your planning, and nothing is too wild to think about. I mean, we all think that we're going to have these things at the ready, and they're just not all the time. So think about other ways to communicate. Those would be the starting point. I also, within that framework, would be how you're going to respond in those situations. And that's what I talked about, doing some holding statements or bullet points, or things for your spokespeople or you yourself as a mayor to practice in advance. And this might be embarrassing for some, but one of the best ways to do it, if you don't have access to a video camera, try speaking as though you're being interviewed into your phone, or simply stand in front of a mirror. You will be surprised at some of your facial expressions. I worked years ago with a political candidate who looked as though he was mad all the time. He said, "Well, I'm not mad." I said, "Well, you're furrowing your brow all the time, so you look mad." And I think unless you have someone to point that out to you, or you take the time to talk into a mirror or into your phone, you don't realize some of those mannerisms. I'm guilty of them too. So I highly recommend practicing that messaging in advance in a way that communicates confidence, even when the world is turning upside down, that you're navigating and leading this effort to get to the other side of it for a more positive outcome.
Okay, good. Here's another one. I know you gave us some insight about what to do if you use social media or choose not to use it, and some warnings about how it's utilized. But how do you think we've learned anything through the pandemic that has changed the way we're going to use social media in future crises?
I do. Primarily being prepared. So many, one of the businesses I told you about remained open. Another one had to close more than 1,000 units. So we had to use social media as a way to communicate some of that. And we not only communicated via that, one client did, the other client did not, but we had to monitor it for what the conversation was out in the communities that those businesses served. And we were able to get a good read of how we were handling things and what the thought was about our business or our entity. So yeah, I think social media will continue to evolve. It will continue to prove to us that we need to be prepared. We need to be very mindful and watchful of the messaging we put out there, that it's accurate, timely, concise, all the things we mentioned in the presentation, and that we're prepared to respond if someone comes back to us positively or negatively. It's very easy to take those conversations offline. You can ask if you can meet with them. In the pandemic, we couldn't necessarily meet in person, but we could direct message one another. We had one client that even gave out their phone number, just said, "Call me." Bold move. I don't know that I would have been quite that bold, but it demonstrated leadership through that, and they came out on top. So make yourself available and monitor social media for how it's impacting you as an individual or your organization, and then be prepared to use it in the most positive light when you have that opportunity to do so.
Yeah, those are good examples on ways to pivot if your crisis wasn't handled the best way. How about this one? Can you give an example of when somebody may have given correct or incomplete information to the public. And what did you do? You know, in a crisis that can be life or death.
Mhm.
What do you do to correct the mistake if you have your agency has released incorrect or incomplete information, and you have a way of measuring that your message was received?
We do have lots of ways to measure. I will say, thankfully, we don't have any examples of putting out inaccurate information from the COVID crisis. But we do have many ways to monitor if our message was received or not. I will tell you the easiest one is to set up Google Alerts and set them up for just a litany of different topics about your community, your business entity, your governmental entity. Set them up with names and be sure to do the Boolean search so you have quotation marks around your name. So you're not just getting, you know, if your last name is Cooper, you're not getting everything for anybody Cooper. I would say Google search is Google Alerts is your primary way to monitor that. Also, make sure you're monitoring all your social channels. The top ones are still Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I don't know many communities who are using TikTok. I can't imagine that would be my primary, but certainly the top three, and LinkedIn if it's an organization that has a business aspect to it. So I would recommend LinkedIn as well. But you can see if your message is being received by the way people talk about you in those venues. Another thing too, if you're lucky enough or fortunate enough to have any sort of media monitoring service, there are some that are local to the state. There are big national ones. But if you have a monitoring service, you can also see what's out there. And then I commit, even with all the high level tools we have as an agency, we have 2 large daily media monitoring services and 3 television services that work at different levels for us. I still go in and I just do general searches a lot of times, and I do them on different platforms. I don't just stick with Google. I use Bing sometimes, Yahoo sometimes. Try using different browsers to see what you can find is being said about you. So set up Google Alerts. If you have access to a monitoring service, do that. You can certainly buy clips from them if you're ever interviewed. And I can get you the name of the one here in the state. I happen to focus on the ones nationally more so, but I can get you the name of the one here in the state. You know, Arkansas Press Association has a lot of resources too. I would highly recommend getting in touch with them. You asked how to get the message out. They can also disseminate information for you if you want to use the Arkansas Press Association. It's a great and worthy organization, and I've used them for many, many years. So look to them to help and support you. And then just go in and do some basic searches on different browsers and see what you come up with.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Google Alerts. That's something new for me that I think I might employ some of the stuff we're doing here. I have one more question, and I think we just have time for one more. And this says schools train students early on and throughout their education on preparing for disasters or emergencies such as a tornado drill, fire drill, or active shooter. Why do you think it's rare for businesses or even communities to have a day where they run through a potential crisis communication scenario? You can sound the tornado siren to make sure it works and people can hear it, but that doesn't always help with communications. Are you aware of any training within the state that would put a community, local government, or a business through a crisis communications training scenario?
adage of, not me, it's not going to happen to me. I think most of us put it last on our list, that we're going to think about that tomorrow, as Scarlett would say. So I do think that it is far too overlooked. And thank you so much for reminding us that even schools train children how to respond in a weather event. So it's critical. It's far too often overlooked. There are media training services within the state and agencies like ours who can help you pull together crisis training. There's also ones at the national and regional level. I know my crisis communications trainer has worked with lots of governmental agencies and entities so that they can equip their own teams. But I think a broad search would yield some great results as to how you can get started and work with your own entity to make sure you're prepared. And I said 2022 planning, which should be happening right now. I just want to encourage you. Now is the time to develop a crisis plan if you don't have one.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm personally tired of hearing the word unprecedented. I want to be ready for any unprecedented anything that comes my way.
I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm over it.
So thank you again so much for your time, Dana. This has been great, and we've recorded it, and I know that we are going to share it with a lot more people, and we're going to reach even more people. This is one of the top topics of concern of our audience that we surveyed when we first began this initiative. So I know that a lot of people will benefit from this presentation.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, and thanks to everyone that participated today. We'll hope that you'll join us on our remaining webinars this month and in November. Don't forget to register for those events. You can do so today, right now. And please don't forget to fill out that survey that you received for this webinar. Thanks again, and we will see you next week. Bye, Dana.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks.